All right. We have everything going. So tonight we're going to be covering Unit 2, the basics of real estate law. So we're going to be kind of now finally getting into the content, getting into the material that y'all all have been wanting to know. So we're going to jump on into the content for this evening. So the first thing that we want to start off with here is we're going to, of course, jump into our learning objectives tonight. We're going to be talking about the differences between land, real estate, real property. We're also going to describe the rights that individuals can have in the ownership and the use of real estate. We'll also give some examples, and you all will also give examples of real and personal property. And we'll also describe and identify fixtures and the trade fixtures. Lastly, we'll jump into reviewing the characteristics of real property as well. Some other items that we're going to discuss is kind of clarifying and cleaning up some of these areas, is where we're going to compare the ways that the title can be held in co-ownership. So there can be tenancy in common, joint tenancy, tenancy by the entirety, and community property. So y'all get to know each and every one of those. We'll also explain the different ways that property can be owned by married couples, and we'll describe the ways in which various business organizations may own property, and we're going to compare the condominium, cooperative, townhouse, and timeshare forms of property ownership as well. So again, these are going to be our different methods that we're going to be going through this evening. We want to go ahead and jump on in to our very first course objective that we do need to complete this evening. One thing that I want you to understand is when people talk about land, this is relatively easy for most people to comprehend. Okay, people are able to comprehend what exactly land is, and they understand the reasoning behind it. So, land is legally defined as the Earth's surface that is extending downward to the center of the Earth and upward to infinity. These also are going to include permanent natural objects, okay, very key there, such as trees and water, okay. So very key, and we'll come back to that in just a moment in regards to natural objects. Other items that land include is going to be the soil, the minerals, the air, and sometimes, and we'll talk about this when we get to that point in the book, is we're going to talk about water. Okay, so again, all of these in these different situations give you a breakdown in exactly how land is going to be involved. Okay, so again, as we're going through this, understand the key things we want to talk about when we look at this. Okay, and let me see here if I can't maybe draw on y'all's screen here. I believe trying to find it. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Let's see here. Let's see. I don't see our whiteboard. Sometimes I have a whiteboard, and if I have a whiteboard, I can kind of show you. Let's see here. Here's our whiteboard right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's talk about our whiteboard real quick. In regards to our whiteboard here, what we're going to end up doing and what I want you to kind of think of is in this situation. So when we're talking about land, okay, what we want to end up doing is I want to end up, let me see if I get a nice big bold marker here. So we're going to say that this right here that I'm drawing on right here, this is going to be your land. Even though it's blue, that's going to be your land, okay? So in this situation, if you were to have in some situations, say that you had a tree, okay? You have this pretty tree here that I'm drawing for y'all because I know y'all love my artwork here. This is your tree. This is your land. And in this situation, this whole item here, this entirety of this is going to end up being basically your land. Now, understand what they were talking about earlier was that when we do these things, Let me see if I can't find another one for us. Let's see here. Basically, everything that goes down and everything that goes up, okay, is basically part of your property, okay? So in that situation, that's why we talked about just a moment ago about soil. Okay? The soil is going to be underneath. Therefore, in that situation, since the soil is going to be underneath, it's going to convey, okay? Anything above here, up here in the top, this is going to be basically, it's going to convey as well. This is where we call air rights up here. And down here, these are your mineral rights, okay? And we'll talk about those as we get to them. But the key thing that we want to understand is that we have this differentiation in regards to both ends. So you own everything up to the heavens, as I always say, and everything down to the hells, okay? So you kind of have the both in this situation. You have both kind of breakage here. Now, one thing, though, that you're going to have to understand, and we'll discuss this here in a little while, is that, of course, everything looks pretty here, okay, in regards to its raw land. But as we all know, nobody ends up actually lives on just raw land. We don't go and get in the dirt and take some leaves and cover ourselves, okay? We build structures. We build things on it. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But when we're talking about land, the emphasis that I'm putting on this is that the land has to be, the most important key feature here is that the land has to end up being raw, okay? Now, that land can be cleared or that land can be wooded. Either or, it's still classified as land, okay? So very key that you be able to differentiate between those two. Now, to come back over here, I need to reshare where I was at. Let me come back over here again so y'all can see the screen. All right. Now, coming back here, as we said, we're talking about the earth in this situation. We want to make certain that we are having the earth's surface extending downward to the center of the earth and upward into infinity. Again, the key thing is that it also is a permanent natural object. Okay, very, very key here. They have to end up in this situation. They have to be permanent natural objects that are going to be involved. Another thing in this situation that we want to make certain of is we have to understand when we're dealing with these items that we do in the same situation, there are going to be natural objects such as trees and water that will also, in some situations, that are going to convey as well. So basically the key word here that you want to focus on is natural objects, okay? Natural objects is very key. So soil, minerals, trees, sometimes shrubs, anything that is growing on that property is going to be natural. It's going to be part of the land. Now you may be saying, now why in the world are you spending this much time talking to me about land, okay? Well, because when you get into something like basically our next slide, where we start talking about real estate, we have a little bit of a difference here, okay? And this is where it can kind of be confusing to some people. Land, if you see real estate, most people, when they talk about selling their home, they say, I'm going to sell my real estate, or I'm looking to buy some real estate, okay? You're not actually buying real estate. There's different ways in how this is done. So, for example, real estate is going to be land at, above, and below the Earth's surface, and here's the key word here, plus all things permanently attached to it, whether natural or artificial. Okay, so everything that we just talked about, land, you're now adding on permanently attached fixtures. So, for example, if Miss Linda goes out in this situation and Miss Linda says, okay, I want to go in here and I'm going to build me a patio on my property. Well, that is going to be a permanently attached fixture, okay? It is an artificial, not a natural fixture, okay? So you got to be able to know the difference there. Now, also, it is going to include man-made improvements and any artificial things attached to the land, such as a building or a fence, as well as infrastructures such as sewers. Okay, so it is extremely, extremely important that you be able to differentiate between these items, because of the fact is that we do have these different structures. We do have these different things. But here's the thing. When you sell property, you're not selling real estate. You're probably like, wait a minute, what did he just say? When you are selling property, you're not selling real estate. You are actually selling real property. Okay? So when you go through this, a lot of people, this is kind of how you can tell an expert from a person that's not an expert. An expert will tell you that I am selling a person's real property. A novice, person that is not familiar with how real estate works or is unfamiliar of the industry, will say that in real estate. Okay, real estate does include the house. Okay, it does include the house. That's what we said. Any structures that are permanently attached. You are permanently attaching a house. Okay, but here's the thing. With real property, you're including both land and real estate. So the two things we just talked about. And the other thing is you're giving away your ownership rights. Does that make sense? You're giving away your ownership rights for real property are going to be described as your bundle of legal rights. Now, in most times, majority of the time, I will go in, and if I'm in my normal classroom, I actually used to have a bunch of twigs, okay? Used to have a bunch of twigs, and I would go around the room, and I would say, Miss Linda, here is your twig called the right of possession. Mr. Eugene, here is your twig of right to control the property. Mr. Grossman, here is your twig of right to enjoyment. Mr. Campbell, here's your twig, the right of exclusion. And Mr. Nobles is going to keep the right of disposition. The reason I do this is because of this situation. Each one of these rights can be given out. You can end up, you can have a tenant who has the right to possess the property for land. So, for example, Mr. Campbell here, he goes over and he has horses or he has cows and he wants to lease some land. Well, Mr. Campbell can end up bringing those cows or those horses onto the land, and guess what? Mr. Campbell has a right to possess the property. And then I go over and I say, you know what? I want to throw parties at this place because it's a lot of acreage. So I can have the right to enjoyment. We can also have Mr. Eugene, who is the owner of it, who controls everything. We can also have Mr. Eugene that can also keep the exclusion. He can exclude people from his property. And then we can have Mr. Eugene could have left a life estate to his wife, say Miss Linda, and she has the right to the disposition of the property. So in this situation, in real estate, not one person has to have all control, okay? So in these situations, understand that you do have these different breakdowns, okay? You do have these different concepts in regards to how they're broken down. So when you sell your property, guess what? You're not just selling them land and real estate. You're selling them land, both land and real estate, plus all of the rights, okay? So in that situation, now let me explain this too. Let's go in a little bit more detail. Let's go in a little bit more detail here, because again, the key thing about the licensing exam is that they're going to go into a ton of detail on the exam. So you need to be aware of these things. So for example, Mr. Wyatt is currently renting a house from Mr. Eugene here, okay? And Miss Linda is wanting to purchase Mr. Eugene's house, and she wants to come in and buy the house. My question now is to Mr. Campbell. Mr. Campbell, if Mr. Eugene is wanting to sell his house, but you're a tenant of it, and Miss Linda wants to purchase it, can Miss Linda kick you out of the house if you have a lease agreement with Mr. Eugene? You sure? He said no. And he's like, yeah, okay. The real answer is that's correct, okay? Just because Mr. Eugene is no longer in the picture, he's selling the property to Miss Linda. Miss Linda has to agree when she buys the property that she will continue the lease agreement until the expiration of the term, okay? So Miss Linda is now going to be forced to allow Mr. Wyatt or Mr. Campbell to stay on at that property. She cannot kick him out. Now, Miss Linda just asked, well, what about subleasing? Can we sublease the property? Well, Miss Linda, that is up to the tenant. That is up to Mr. Wyatt if he wants to sublease, okay? But you have to, in the situation, you have to keep it to the same degree that Mr. Wyatt has, if that makes sense. So whatever Mr. Eugene worked out with Mr. Wyatt, you have to keep to those terms until his lease agreement expires.
And what if you damage the property?
So she's asking, what if somebody damages the property? And I'm assuming you're talking about if Mr. Wyatt destroys it. Well, the terms of the lease agreement that Mr. Eugene worked out with Wyatt stand in place. So if you purchase the property from Mr. Eugene and his deal said that any damage Wyatt has to fix, then Mr. Wyatt has to repair those, or you could sue Mr. Wyatt for those repairs. Okay, makes sense? Okay, so again, we have to hold our rights in this situation. So again, this is basically your real property. Okay, so when you are selling property, you're not selling just the land, real estate. You're selling the land, the real estate, and the real property, which is basically the legal rights, okay? Now I'm gonna tell you, and this is something that you need to all know, you need and you will have to know every one of those rights right here. All of your rights that are under the ownership rights, the right to possession, control, enjoyment, exclusion, disposition, you must know that for your licensing exam, okay? Now I will tell everybody, when y'all finish this course with me, and we finish all 6 courses that we have to go through, we will be doing a prep course, okay? The prep course in this situation is going to tell you every single little thing you need to study. So like I'm going to tell you, you need to know the content within the textbooks, okay? However, I do not expect any of my students to go in and to try to memorize every single page of every single book. Does that make sense? It's impossible. I'm just going to be honest. You cannot read and know every single thing. So my prep course, when we're finished, will tell you everything to focus on. But as I lecture, I will hit you with certain things that you need to be familiar with. Does that make sense? Everybody good with that? Okay. So again, these are some of the things you need to know. But at the end in the prep course, we'll go through and I'll tell you exactly what you need to know. Now, again, also real property includes the title that refers to the ownership of real property, okay? So here's the difference here, okay? And this is the most interesting thing. Mr. Eugene, when you you purchase a vehicle and you pay off your vehicle, Mr. Eugene, what exactly do you end up getting from the DMV showing that you own your vehicle? You get a title. Okay. When you, Mr. Eugene, go over and you pay off your house, does the DMV give you a title? Do you get a title?
Well, you get a title to the house. I mean,
So they give you a form called the title.
No.
No, what do they give you?
This is the deed.
Deed, yeah, deed.
Exactly. He just said it. Second bullet. It's a deed.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you take your licensing exam, everybody, another sidebar, what's going to happen is guess what? They're going to say that Wyatt has paid off his house and he will get blank from the seller. And it'll say title, and it'll say deed, and it'll say a commitment, and it'll say none of the above. So, Mr. Wyatt, you get a title, right, for ownership? Huh? No, you get a deed. Okay? The title, this is where it gets confusing, okay? The title, the word title, refers to ownership of the property. Does that make sense? So the word title is, yes, you have title to the property, but the actual document that's in your hand is called a deed. Okay? So Mr. Wyatt pays off his house, he owns title to it, but the form, the paper that you would have is called a deed. Okay? And just like you did there, it's not going to click, and it does that all the time. It's not just you, it's every person. It's a new language. Okay? So when we're dealing with these situations, understand that you are going to have a title that's going to refer to the ownership, and the deed is actually going to be that document that you're going to transfer. So Wyatt, if you paid off your house and then down the road you decide, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sell my property to Mr. Eugene. You're going to transfer title, but what you're going to sign at closing is going to be the deed. Okay? You're signing over your interest to Mr. Nobles. Now, we talked about subsurface air and water rights. Okay, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because when we get into the principles class, we're going to spend an entire chapter on these three items. And I mean an entire chapter on these three items. But what you need to know is that these three items are things that are going to also convey to you when you purchase the property. Except Mr. Eugene. So Mr. Jacob decides that he wants to sell one of his rental houses. Okay? And Mr. Jacob says to Mr. Eugene here, Mr. Eugene, I want to sell my property to you. However, I'm not giving you the ownership to my subsurface or my mineral rights. Can Mr. Jacob, Mr. Eugene, can he keep the mineral rights? Of course he can. Mr. Jacob has all rights where he can sell just his property. Okay, just his property, the surface property, and he can keep his subsurface property. Some people, not here in Texas, but some people also will try to keep their air rights or their water rights. Okay, they can do that. Now, understand that this is one thing I always tell people is, and clients always will come in, and this is where you can also tell a novice from a person that's an expert. You do not get mineral rights in a subdivision, okay? When you're buying a house in a subdivision, there is no mineral rights. Why is that? Because the fact is, the mineral rights end up, they've already been purchased by the developer, and the developer did not transfer their rights to the people. So the developer will hold all of the mineral rights, okay? Very key in this situation. Now, here's where we get to the good stuff. How many of y'all probably are sitting here like, I thought that was the good stuff? No, this is the good stuff right here. You ready? All right, so let's play this out. I'm going to try to give you some examples here, okay? I'm going to test y'all real quick. So I'm going to go around here and test some students, and online students, you be ready too, because I'm going to call on some of you. If you don't know how to turn on your microphone, you should see a spot that has a microphone in your bottom left. You just click it, and you'll end up answering the question. But here we go. We're going to start off first in classroom. So my in classroom students. All right, Mr. Wyatt. Okay, let's look up here. We said personal property, it's property that can be owned and that does not fit the definition of real property. It is movable, and it's also called chattels. Okay? That's what we just read. Now, Mr. Wyatt, in this room where we're at right now, I want you to point to me one item in this room that is personal property.
Personal property.
Uh-huh.
Your computers,
Okay, he says my computers. All right. Mr. Eugene.
fans, chairs.
Okay, fans. Miss Linda.
The light.
The lights. Okay. Mr. Garrett, what is something, sir, that you end up that is personal property in the room that you're sitting at, sir?
My animal mounts, like taxidermy.
All right, his mounts on his wall. Okay, that is personal property. Good job. Let's see here, Mr. Keith. Long time no see, sir. How are you?
Good, good. Everything's going good.
Awesome, man. Awesome. I'm glad to see you in class.
I'm glad to see you
So
too.
my question is, it's going, man. It's going good. Well, my question, sir, what are you or what's around you that's personal property?
Well, I'm actually laying on it. My bed.
His bed. Very good. Good one. Oh, everybody in here is jealous of you, Keith. I promise you. But no, that's good. That is right. Your bed definitely is going to be personal property. That's awesome. Good job. My name is Mr. Can you hear me, sir? I want to make sure I can get you. Mr. Darren's probably having technical issues, and that's fine. That's no worry. But what happens is, one thing I can tell you for his particular situation is he does rims. So each and every one of those rims at his property is going to end up being personal property. So anything that you see, okay, anything that you see at all, okay, that can be picked up is going to be personal property. All right. Now, the key thing in this is where we get to the easy stuff. That's pretty simple, right? I mean, I can come over here and I pick up this chair and walk off with it. It's not that hard, okay? But let me ask you this. We're going to throw a little curveball here. Miss Linda in here, she is a very picky person, and she wants everything to be mounted to the wall, okay? So she comes in and she mounts every chair to the wall. And I mean, she cements them and mounts them to the not to the wall, but to the floor. Now, Mr. Wyatt, if she does that, my question for you is, what happens now to those chairs?
They're not movable.
They're unmovable. And because they're unmovable, they become let's see if it's here, right there. It becomes a fixture. Okay? If personal property is attached to, and y'all don't write this yet, you don't have to, we're going to get to it. If personal property is cemented down or it is attached, going back here, if it's attached to the property where it cannot easily be moved, it is now going to end up being, in this situation, it is going to be a fixture. Yes, Miss Linda, you've got a question.
What if
Yes, ma'am.
you have a property
Uh-huh. What if I have a property, she's saying, for those of you online,
and you have cameras in on that property?
and you have cameras on the property,
Is that a permanent or is that a fixture?
is it going to be personal or is it going to be a fixture? So, is it going to be personal property or is it going to be fixture? Mr. Garrett, what do you think, sir?
I think if it's bolted down, it's a fixture, but if it just twists off, it's personal property.
All right, so Mr. Garrett just told me this. Mr. Garrett says he thinks that if it is going to be bolted down, it's going to be a fixture. If it is easy to twist off, it's going to be personal property. And guess what, Mr. Garrett? You're 100% correct. Very good job on that one. So in that situation, if the property, for example, y'all probably seen these Ring doorbells where you can go in, you can screw them into, the wall, just take a screw and you screw it in. If you do that, that's a Ring doorbell. And in that particular situation, guess what happens? It is personal property because it can easily be removed. But if your parents or you yourself put hardwire cameras through the house, meaning that there are wires running through your attic, it is going to end up being a fixture. Okay? So in that situation, you have to look at these. And the reason Miss Linda brought that up is because of the fact we had that issue. So how do we fix that? How do we stop that from occurring? Let's say, for example, Mr. Jacob comes to me and he says, Mr. Nobles, I want you to sell my property, but I have hardwire cameras through my house. And I'm just talking to him to list his property. Okay, so I'm just sitting there to talk to him. So Mr. Keith, I'm going to come to you for a minute. Okay, so we're going to say this situation. Mr. Keith, I come over to you. Mr. Jacob has came to me. And Mr. Jacob has told me that he wants to go over and that he wants to sell his property, but he wants to take his cameras with him. What should we do, or what do you think we should do, Mr. Keith? What would you tell me if I was coming to you for advice?
If he wants to take the cameras with him, I would say first ask how. Are we talking about them being a fixture or them being personal property?
So what he's doing, I'll kind of give you a little more guidance here.
Okay.
So they're currently, because of the fact they're attached and they're hardwired,
okay,
they're going to be permanent. So they would be a fixture. But now he wants to, before he sells or lists it, he wants to not have those conveyed by the sale. So he wants to somehow get these or basically what we call, what's the word here? Let me switch my slide here. I want to make sure I use the right word. I got to find it. Where is it here? Of course, when you're trying to find it, you can't ever find it. Nope, that's not it. Well, I can't even find it. And I'll find it after I start teaching here in a little bit, I promise you. Where is it? Not there. Of course, it's my luck today. So in this situation, it's basically where it's going to end up being severed. There's the word, severed. That's the word I'm looking for. So he wants to sever it, Keith. Okay. So he ends up, he's telling you, I want to sever. So whenever and that's kind of, I guess we're going to get ahead of ourselves here, and that's good. Whenever you want to take a fixture and you want to no longer make it a fixture, you have to, the word they use is severance. We have to sever. Yes, that's the word. We have to cut it. Okay, we got to break it apart. So Mr. Jacob wants to sever the cameras from his property. Now, let me ask you, so coming back to that, so we know it's a permanent fixture, but he wants to sever them to make them back to personal so he can take them with him. What exactly would you advise Mr. Jacob to do?
I would advise him to get with the contractor.
Okay, and remove them?
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Keith here is telling me that he would get with the contractors and have the contractors come out and remove them prior to listing them. Is that what you're saying, Keith?
Yes.
There you go. Good job. Exactly. You're on this. So prior to listing, you're right on this, but you're doing a good job. So what you do on anything, it doesn't have to just be cameras, but if a client wants to take something with them, okay, if a client wants to take something with them, what they have to end up doing is they need to take it down, repair the hole or whatever it's called, and then list the property with them already taken out. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Keith, you good?
Yeah. Okay, I got you. Yes, sir.
All right, perfect. So in that particular situation, what's happening is we are now removing them, and that leads us perfectly into where we're going to our next slide here. It's perfect. So in this situation, like you just saw from what we were talking about, the distinction between real property and personal property is not always going to be clear. Okay. So in this situation, for example, this can occur in some particular situations, but say, for example, that, in this situation, Mr. Wyatt here, Mr. Wyatt tells me, he says, Mr. Nobles, I want to sell my house. I say, okay, Mr. Wyatt. And he says, I have a hot tub on my back porch that I'm going to take with me. I say, perfect, man. I take my hot tub too, right? So he's like, it's movable. All I got to do is go get a forklift, pick that thing up, put it in the back of my truck, and I'm good. I'm gone. All right. So Mr. Wyatt says, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a forklift, and I'm going to lift this thing, and I'm going to take it. Well, you've got Mr. Garrett here, who is over here. Mr. Garrett, he says when he comes to walk the property, he's with Miss Linda, who's a realtor, and Miss Linda's showing the property. And Miss Linda, what are you going to do if you see a hot tub and Mr. Garrett, your client's here? What are you going to tell your client, Mr. Garrett, in regards to that hot tub? Is it going to convey or is it not going to convey? Now understand, the key point here is he's got to use a forklift to pick it up and put it on his truck. So what are you going to tell your client, Mr. Garrett? Mr. Garrett's sitting on here waiting right now. What you going to tell him, Miss Linda? How do you know that? You don't know that. You have no idea. You don't know. You just see a hot tub. Yeah. You're going to think most likely that what? It's staying. It's a hot tub. It's a big hot tub. Say it's a 15-person hot tub. Okay? It's a big hot tub. Yeah, Wyatt likes to throw crazy parties. So just going to let y'all know. So what you're going to assume is Garrett's going to assume, even if you don't say anything, Miss Linda, Garrett's going to assume 15-person hot tub, that thing's staying. That's not going nowhere. Okay? But if I don't have that removed or I don't put that somewhere in the MLS, Garrett's under the assumption that it's real property. Wyatt told me, his listing agent, he's taking it. It's personal property. See an issue here? It has to be conveyed. Now, in reality, legally, it doesn't matter how it's moved. It's just, can it be moved? Okay, I use that, I purposely threw in that he has to take a forklift. It doesn't matter if he's got to take a forklift or not. Can it be moved? Yes, that's all that matters. Okay, now don't get like some other students that I've taught and they say, well, wait a minute now, Mr. Nobles, you can move a house. We could go jack up a house and put it on an 18 and wheel it. No, you've got to do a lot of work to do that. Okay, we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that can be easily moved with equipment. Okay. So in that situation, guess what? You have your distinction is not always going to be clear. Okay. So best thing to do, let's flip this around here. So I'm gonna do one thing, and Garrett, I'm gonna come back to you here in a second. Okay. Mr. Garrett, in this situation, if you want the hot tub, what should you do? If you want that hot tub to convey, what do you think you should do, Mr. Garrett?
Try to add it to the contract or say you'll pay for it.
Exactly. He said I should try to add it to the contract or try to pay for it in that situation. That's exactly correct. Now, Mr. Wyatt, I'm going to ask you a question, sir. I'm your listing agent, and you told me that you want me to go over and you want to make certain that you keep your hot tub. If I'm listing your property, what do you need to make certain that I do as your listing agent? That it's going to stay with you. It's going with you. Where should I put it? I'm going to list it, but where's the most important part it needs to be in? Nope. Starts with a C. Mr. Garrett just told you. In the contract.
Contract.
Yes, in the contract. In that situation, what you got to make certain of in this situation is anything that you want, this is key for anything in real estate. If your client wants to keep something, it better be in the contract. Okay? Ms. Nobles can tell you that in the back. She can tell you for certain. You have to make certain that those documents are in the contract. Okay, they have to be in the contract. Okay, if it's not in the contract, doesn't really convey, and that's where you end up in this distinction not always clear. Okay, now,
Can I say something?
yes, Ms. Nobles.
Make sure when you do that contract that whatever it is, don't go and out of a whim and go and move something out of there.
What do you mean by that?
In other words, if you say that you're going to give them that, say, a stove,
Mhm.
and it's in the contract,
Uh-huh.
and then your wife and you discuss and this, that, and other,
Mhm.
and y'all both came to agreement, well, I'm gonna take the stove with me, and you go in the house and you remove that stove without notifying the other people, you could be getting into a lot of problems.
So what she just said, and I'll kind of sum up what she just said for those of you listening online. She said, make certain that if you are the listing agent and your client has put it in there that they're going to leave a certain asset, like a stove she was using, you need to make certain that your client does not remove that item before the closing. They have to make certain that they convey it. So whatever's there needs to be conveyed, and that's very good. Now, jumping back over here to the screen here for a minute. So the next thing that you see up here is Mr. Eugene. What did we just talk about in regards to real property? Real property is conveyed by a bill of sale or receipt, while personal property is conveyed by a deed. True or false?
Real property.
So am I true or false on that one? False, why is that?
Because your real property is deed, not the personal property.
That's right. I switched them, didn't I?
Yeah.
I jumped them around. And I do that a lot when I'm teaching because the fact is I want to see if you're awake in those situations. So in that situation is this, is that yes, real property is always conveyed by title, right, Wyatt? Real property is always conveyed by title. So when you buy land, you get a piece of paper that says title, right? There you go. See, I'm reinforcing that information on him. He's getting it. So in that situation, real property is conveyed by a deed, okay? By a deed. Now, personal property is conveyed by a bill of sale or a receipt. How many of you go to the grocery store? Mr. Keith, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. When you go over, Mr. Keith, to the grocery store, do you walk into, say, H-E-B, and you walk in and get your groceries, and you walk up to the counter and you check out, and the clerk gives you a deed, right? When you buy your stuff, you just walk up there and they're like, all right, Mr. Keith, and that's $20. Here you go. Okay, here's your deed showing that you bought your groceries. Is that how this works, Mr. Keith?
No, she gives me a receipt.
They give you a receipt. Exactly there. They give him a receipt, okay? They're not going to give you a deed. They're going to give you a receipt. So the reason I spend so much time on this particular area is a lot of people say, why are you wasting your time here? I'm not wasting time because you're going to get about 5 or 6 questions off of this one bullet right here, okay? What happens is they're going to mix in throughout your entire test these different things, and they're going to give you a hypothetical where you're going to go buy your groceries. And when you buy your groceries, guess what? They're going to say you get a deed, and that's going to be false, okay? So understand in these situations, how you tell the difference of property is based upon what type of ownership document you're getting, okay? If I'm getting a deed, then that means it's real property. If I'm getting a bill of sale or a receipt, that's going to be personal property. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit in regards to why that's important, okay? Now, here's the best part, okay? Best part that I love about this. I can spend a lot of time talking about this. I love teaching this stuff, but I'm going to give you some examples here. So a manufactured house. Now, for everybody to understand this, Mr. Eugene, a manufactured home, is that a residential resale house?
Manufactured.
Manufactured.
Is
Is it a house like what you live in?
No.
No. So your house is not a manufactured home?
Well, yeah, it's manufactured. What kind of home you talking about? A trailer house or?
I'm talking about in this, a manufactured home. So it's a mobile home, right? Okay, it's a professional word for mobile home. That's what it is. Okay, so a mobile home or manufacturer, they like to use more of the nice, bigger words on the test, but a mobile home or manufactured home can be real or personal. Huh, that's wild. Well, Mr. Eugene just said it here. Here's the reason why. A manufactured home can end up in that situation. It can end up being either or. Okay. So in that situation, we're going to see those differences here. So, Garrett, I want to pick on you for a second, sir. Okay. Mr. Garrett, when would a mobile or manufactured house, when would it be personal property? When do you think it would be?
When it would be
At
personal,
what stage? Yeah, when would it be personal?
if it's on cement blocks or wheels.
If it's now, so the first one was wrong. Okay, if it's on cement blocks, it's going to be real. But if it's on wheels, you're right. It's going to end up being personal. Okay, so the key thing, just to kind of remind yourself here, and a lot of people get that mixed up, and that's fine. Understand that if it can be moved, it's going to be personal. So when it's on the wheels, you can move it. But when it's on cement blocks, it's very difficult to move it. Okay, do you see the difference there, Garrett?
Yes, sir.
Perfect, perfect. So what happens is, while this home is being manufactured, it can be personal. While it ends up in another situation, if it is, like I said, in this situation as well, if it's being moved, it's going to be personal. But the minute that they take those wheels off, that thing is now a real property. Okay? This is my next favorite one, right here on the plant. I love this part. And the reason I do this is because my mother loves to she likes to plant flowers and all. She likes to plant vegetables and has a little garden in her backyard and all. So, of course, I've got to pick on her tonight. Okay? So in this situation, here we go. Miss Linda, when you go over here, all right, and you end up, Miss Linda, you go down to Lowe's. By the way, everybody online, she should have ownership in Lowe's by now. But if the situation is, when you go to Lowe's and you go to buy, let's say, some watermelon seeds, okay? Are those seeds, when you purchase those, do you carry the ground when you get from Lowe's and you carry the ground to your house and just carry the dirt and all with you? What do you do? Well, how do you buy them? So they're in a packet. So if they're in a packet, do you get let's come back here for a minute. Let's get back at okay, but I'm saying in a packet. When you buy them, do you get a deed or do you get a receipt when you're at Lowe's for those seeds? You get a receipt. So if you get a receipt, what type of property are they? They're personal property. Okay? So now Miss Linda has this personal property, these watermelon seeds in a packet, and she walks on home and she gets her wonderful son to go and to dig a hole, and she pours those seeds into the ground, and her son puts the soil over those seeds. Okay? Now in that situation, the moment that we end up, that we put those seeds in the ground and we push the soil over it, Mr. Wyatt, what happens to those seeds now? Are they personal or real property? They're in the where? They're in the ground. If they're in the ground, they're permanently attached to the ground. They're real property. You see, I got you there? So in that situation what happens is, when I have them in my hand, the seeds in my hand, they're personal because I can move them around. I can give them out to y'all. But the minute I open them, pour them into it, and put the water and soil and all on it, they are now classified as real property. Now I'm going to trick you again. You ready? So now we go over here, and because of my wonderful green thumb that I have, they end up, these watermelons have now grown up, and we now have watermelon plants with the watermelon on them. Now, Wyatt, you come over and you pick up a watermelon and break it off its stem. What is that watermelon?
I break it on its stem, it's detached from the ground.
So it's what?
Personal.
It's personal now. But when they're attached to the stem, what are they? They're real. Do you see the difference here?
Yeah.
Okay. That is basically the fructus naturalis. That's the legal terminology. Okay. It's where trees, shrubs, and grasses are all going to be real property until they end up, they're harvested. The minute they're harvested, the crops are broken off, they become personal property. Does that make sense? It's just like, let me go back up to the manufactured housing. Same concept here. Same concept, okay? The moment, like we talked with Garrett just a second ago, Garrett buys a mobile home. They're transporting his mobile home to his place, to his property. As long as that mobile home is on the trailer and it's being hauled down the interstate, that thing is personal property. The minute that house is put on his land on cinder blocks, and it doesn't have to have a skirting, but if a skirting is put around it, it is now real estate. But Garrett decides, I'm moving, and I want to take my trailer with me, and he puts the wheels back on, and he starts hauling it down the road to another property. Guess what? It went from real back to personal. Okay, so the key thing here is the whole purpose of spending this time on this and emphasizing this is because of the fact is this whole concept, this whole slide, can be tricky very quickly. Okay, so when you are reading your questions, when you're taking your exams, read the questions very, very carefully. Does that make sense? It's imperative that you read them very carefully. Now, we're going into fixtures, okay? Now, Miss Linda, I knew you will forget this by then, so I'm going to ask you, what exactly is chattels? What is chattels?
I don't know what that word is.
She says she don't know what this word is. Can you believe that, Wyatt? What's chattels, Mr. Wyatt? Save her today.
That was also called for not manufactured homes, right? Or
Starts with a P.
Permanent?
Nope.
that was personal property.
There you go. It was personal property. Okay. So here you go. Y'all ready?
Yeah.
Write this down real quick. You ready? Chattels, fixtures, and trade fixtures can all equal personal property. See how there can be 3 words for one? So guess what? Here's where it gets even better. So Keith, you said just a minute ago you're in your bed. So your bed, that's one word called bed. But a bed also can be personal property. It can be chattels. It could be a fixture, and it could be a trade fixture. So one item can be 5 things. Meaning when a test maker is writing a test, they got 5 words they can use on you for one item. Okay? 5 words, one item. All right. So again, make certain in that situation that you know those. Does that make sense? Okay? Because it can be very confusing. Okay? Now, again, in this situation, when we talk about fixtures here, okay, we're going to talk about a fixture, and I'm going to kind of help you digest this for a minute, because you're going to see fixture, and you just saw a trade fixture. You see these two that I'm bouncing back and forth on? A fixture applies to personal homes, personal residences, okay? So these are things that are personal. A trade fixture applies to businesses. So right now, here I am in my office teaching y'all. And in this situation, anything in this office is classified as a trade fixture. Because guess what? It all applies to my business. Okay? But a fixture is going to be something that is in your personal home. Okay, so you need to be able to know the differences here. So, in regards to fixtures, a fixture is personal property that has been so affixed to land or building that by law, it becomes part of the real property. So Wyatt, you're a chef. You love to cook, okay? So you get these wonderful solid wood cabinets that came in from, say, the Bahamas. They are just these nice high-end cabinets, and you put them into your kitchen, okay? Because he installs them into his kitchen, do you think he's going to end up taking some penny nails and nailing those into his studs of his house? No, they're expensive. You're not going to hang something cheaply. You're going to put them in there with some screws and make sure that they're going to hold, okay? But when you do that, what happens? What happens in this situation, Wyatt?
Making it like permanent?
Yeah, you made it permanent. You now made that personal property, those cabinets, now a fixture. Okay, you made them a fixture. Because when you got those cabinets, they came and they sat on your front door. You and Mr. Grossman here went and picked them up, and y'all screwed them into that studs of that house so they don't come out. They're a fixture. They ain't coming down. Okay? And they're not easily coming down without causing destruction of the house. Do you understand? Okay? So they're a fixture. Now here's another one that's fun. Miss Linda decides that she, because she's actually done this before, that she wants to have this nice big stove in her kitchen. Okay? And so she modifies her cabinet to fit this nice big stove to fit her into her cabinet. Okay? Miss Linda goes and does that. Well, guess what, y'all? They only create one stove that fits that particular cabinet because of that. So there's only one stove out there. Miss Linda says to you, Wyatt, Mr. Agent here, she wants to sell her house, but she is taking her stove with her. Can she take it with her? You say yes? Mr. Grossman, can she take it with her? Mr. Grossman says no. Mr. Eugene? Mr. Eugene says no. Miss Linda? Miss Linda? Yes or no? Yes, she can take it with her. Mr. Keith, do you think she can take it with her?
I would say no, unless her and the other party come up with some type of agreement.
Ah, he got it there. I'm not going to say that out loud to them, Keith. I'm going to keep that between me and you and the people online. But you're right on it. Mr. Keith was right on it here. Okay? So we'll come back to this. Mr. Garrett, what do you think?
I don't think they can take it.
All right. The real thing is no, Miss Linda cannot take it because it is custom to that home. And number two, this is the part that Mr. Keith got. Great job on that, by the way. The only way Miss Nobles can take it is if her and the buyer come to an agreement to end up letting her take that property. But she cannot willy-nilly take that with her without letting the buyer know. Okay. So very good job on that, Keith. Very, very good job. Now, another thing that they're going to ask, so say, for example, that there is an issue, okay, because we just talked about in some of these situations that right here at that top bullet, the distinction is not always clear, but is important for the licensee to know, okay? So what if we go back to this Wyatt, and Wyatt goes up at his house, and Wyatt has installed this huge 100-inch TV, big old TV. He's installed it, and he's got it so much installed that it is basically in that situation, it's very difficult to get off without causing damage. Okay, a TV would basically 99% of the time be what, Stefan? Personal property. Take it with you. Okay. But because you've created this big TV and it's attached so solidly, we need to look at the method, the legal test of a fixture. So we need to look at the method of how it is annexed. How exactly does Wyatt have this TV on the wall? How exactly does he have it? Also, is it what's called an adaptation to real estate? Does it automatically adapt to the real property? And lastly, was there any agreements? Did Wyatt make any implied agreements with the buyer that he would leave the TV? Okay, so these are going to be your legal tests to find out, are these going to end up being part of the property? Does this make sense so far? Okay. Now, in regards to trade fixtures are going to be an article that is going to be owned by a tenant and attached to a rental space or building or used in conducting a business. This is the separate one. This is where you no longer are going to end up having a house. You're dealing with a commercial building most of the time. Okay. So in this situation, the tenant is going to be responsible for the removal and any damage caused by removal, and any trade fixture not removed is going to become real property of that landlord. So Mr. Wyatt is going to, in this situation, Mr. Wyatt is a chef, like we just said. Okay. So in this situation, we want to make certain that as we're going through this, Mr. Wyatt, he, like I said, he's a chef. He says, you know what? I love the building I'm in. I am going to end up building a wood burning stove in my building that I'm renting from Mr. Eugene. Okay. So Mr. Wyatt goes over. Mr. Wyatt builds this wood burning stove. But guess what? Mr. Wyatt, your signature for your business is that you are a wood burning stove expert. Now, if he put a big old brick deal in your building, Mr. Eugene, do you want him to destroy that?
I didn't want to begin with. Yes, I do.
Okay. So he said, if I didn't have it, I would want him to tear it down. If I did, if it was there, I don't want him to take it. But what happens in this situation is Mr. Wyatt can take it with him. He can tear it down brick by brick and take it out. Or he may break down a portion of the wall to get forklift in, pick it up, and carry it off. Okay. But the key thing is that any damage caused by removal, Wyatt must fix. Okay. If Wyatt at any point leaves that property, leaves that item in the property, that wood burning stove, it automatically becomes real, not personal. Even if Mr. Eugene, he hung a TV right here, and it's just a basic TV with a basic mount. If he leaves it, it is now permanent real property, not personal property.
So I couldn't take it off if I wanted it.
You can, but you have to separate, like we talked about. Okay. But what I'm saying is it's classified as real property. Okay. All right. Now, I know that was a bunch. Okay, I know that's a ton of material that I just shoved in your head right there. Okay, but we're going through and we're going to try to finish this up. We're about more than halfway through. So again, we're going to keep pushing forward, but like I said, it's a lot of information to retain. And of course, that's why I'm recording these lectures so that you can go back and listen to them if you're confused about something. The previous lecture is being uploaded as we're speaking, and it should be up here before I leave this evening. And this one, hopefully, if the internet goes well, I'll have this one up for you also as well on the Google Classroom. But let's get back here. So characteristics of real property. Now, of course, these are going to be the things that make real property valuable. Okay, that's why we talk about here the economic characteristics. Okay, what exactly makes this item valuable? Okay, so in this particular situation, the key thing that we're going to be discussing, that we're going to be talking about, is end up being basically number one, diversity. Okay, there's very limited amount of property. Also, another thing is you can improve it. Okay, one thing about real property is you can build on it, make it bigger, make it better, tear it down, restart, whatever you want. You can add value to it. It also is a very permanent investment. And there is the area preference. Okay, basically, a property located in College Station, Texas, is not going to have as much value as a property that's on Miami Beach. Okay, there's a difference. Okay, so that's what gives the land value. Other things, such as the physical characteristics. Now I'm going to see who's going to be my student that's going to give me my jokester. Let's see if anybody does it this semester. Ends up in this situation. Real property cannot be moved. Nobody's going to say anything? No? I always get one student that says, well, Mr. Nobles, if you really think about it, you could go get a dump truck and fill the whole dump truck up with the dirt and then move it.
I mean, I was going to say indestructibility. It's a place with a nuke.
But see, here's the key thing in this situation, and that you got to be able to know the difference is that you are going to end up immobile. Is you cannot, the key thing, remember, is with real property, we set everything to the heavens and to the hell. So you may be able to take the surface property, but ultimately, how are you going to get the air? And how are you going to catch the minerals underneath? You're not going to be able to catch everything, okay? So you cannot move it, cannot be destroyed. Even if you hit it with a nuke, you don't destroy the air, and you don't destroy the center of the earth. You may destroy the surface and some of the subsurface, but you're not going to ultimately destroy it, okay? And another thing is, physical characteristics is it's unique. It's unique. Just like all of us, we're all unique. We all have different things that make us different. The physical characteristics is it's unique. The soil and the land is just like the fingerprints on your fingers. They're each unique. You're not going to find the same thing in every single one. Okay? Now, with that being said, now we're getting into the good stuff. Okay? This is going to be your forms of real estate ownership. Okay? So we're getting closer to the end, guys and gals. We're getting there. Okay? We're almost there. So when we're talking about this, the ownership in severalty. Now, Miss Linda, what does that word right there mean? What's several mean? More than one. Read that definition for me.
Title is held by one individual or corporation.
Exactly. So what they're saying online, for you online, this is what she's saying. So if you look up here at the first bullet, ownership and severalty, and I put my hand over TY and I said, what's that word? And she said, several. I said, what does several mean? She said, a lot of people. And I said, read the definition there. Title is held by one individual or corporation. Don't you love real estate? That's how it is, okay? real estate can be very confusing because when you look at several, especially if I see the word several, I'm going to say ton of people. But in reality, ownership and severalty means one person. So you're going to have to be able to know that difference. Okay? Ownership and severalty means more than one person. Now, co-ownership. Okay? Co-ownership is going to be titled as held by two or more individuals. Now that's pretty simple. That's pretty basic. Co-ownership, okay, two people or more. However, and this is where it gets difficult, okay, and you'll probably have a good maybe 7 questions over this one. You're going to have to know the difference in regards to the different types of co-ownership. Okay, so before we jump into that, you'll see right here, ownership and severalty, co-ownership continues, co-ownership continues, co-ownership continues, and then you'll see down here at the bottom, in trust, that's another one, in trust, and then we start talking about business ownerships, okay? So what we're talking about, I want you to kind of see what I just did, okay? So we just talked about when dealing with it as an individual, ownership and severalty, or as a corporation, one person. Co-ownership, understand that it is a form, okay? Co-ownership is a form, but underneath, you see each one of these tenancy in common? The tenancy in common is a form of co-ownership. Does that make sense? Okay, so don't think co-ownership is another one. No, this tenancy in common is a form of co-ownership. Makes sense, okay? So when we're talking co-ownership, two or more people. If it's one person or one corporation, ownership and severalty, okay? Now, co-ownership is going to be tenancy in common. And tenancy in common is going to be where each tenant has an fractional interest in the property. Okay? Each one has a fraction of the ownership of the property. Now understand, physical property is not divided and each owner is entitled to possession of the whole property. And each owner can sell, convey, mortgage, or transfer his or her rights without the consent of the others. So what this is say in this situation, Keith, Garrett, and Mr. Eugene, in this situation, we have 3 people here that own a business together, and they own a lot or a building together, and they have tenancy in common. They all own 1/3 fractional interest. Okay, so Mr. Eugene, you can go mortgage, sell yours, whatever you want to do with it. Mr. Keith can do what he wants, and Mr. Garrett can do what he wants. Okay, you don't have to have the consent of the other party. You can do what you want. Okay, the problem with this is that what happens is, and this occurs a lot during tenants in common, is that Mr. Keith gets mad at Mr. Garrett and Mr. Eugene. And so Mr. Keith says, you know what, screw both of y'all, I hate you, I'm going to go sell my portion to y'all's worst enemy. So he goes and sells it to Mr. Wyatt. And Mr. Wyatt hates both Mr. Eugene and Mr. Garrett. Well, what happens to the overall business venture and the whole selling and everything? It just falls apart. Okay? So in that situation, you have to understand that there are going to end up being these different types of situations. Okay? You have to be able to know these differences. Okay? So that's one type. Tenancy in common is one type of co-ownership. Further, with tenancy in common, each tenant, like we said, is going to have that fractional interest they can convey and all of that same stuff that we just talked about. We're going to go to the 4th bullet. It's upon the death of the co-owner, the undivided interest will pass to their heirs or according to their will or their living trust. So say that Mr. Keith actually did not have a problem with Mr. Garrett or Mr. Eugene. Mr. Keith just passes away, and Mr. Keith's wife, who ended up hated Mr. Eugene and Mr. Garrett, she now gets control of the business. In that situation, again, you run into a headache. Okay? That's why tenancy in common It may work for the parties that are together, but you have to have everybody working together. Okay, the whole family, not just one person. Everybody has to get along. Okay. Now, another one is called joint tenancy. Okay, this is the second form of co-ownership. Joint tenancy is where the parties must be explicitly named as joint tenants on the deed. These often will include right of survivorship upon their death, and the interest will pass to the other joint tenants. So Mr. Wyatt, Mr. Justin, and Mr. Stefan, we three own a business together, a building, we'll say. We own a commercial building. And God forbid, Mr. Wyatt drives home and gets killed in an accident. Okay? In that situation, if we have a joint tenancy, Mr. Wyatt in this particular situation, his interest would transfer to Mr. Stefan and Mr. Nobles. Okay? Now, Mr. Stefan, unfortunately, he dies in a tragic accident. What happens now, Mr. Stefan? You now have died, and I'm the only one remaining. Then I get every bit of it. Okay? So I get every bit. So what happens is, in a joint tenancy, you want to be, as I always tell people, you want to be the last man standing or the last woman standing. Okay? Because in that situation, the last person that stands gets 100%. Okay? So that's one of those situations with a joint tenancy is that last person inherits everything. Okay? Now, in tenancy by the entirety. Tenancy by the entirety is often utilized by husband and wife that are not in community property states. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But it's husband and wives will have an equal undivided interest in the property. They have a right to survivorship, which means whoever lives, the person that resides above, gets that transfer. So if the husband dies, the wife gets it. The wife dies, the husband gets it. And it's conveyed by a deed that's signed by both parties. One party can't, however, convey 1/2 interest. So if the wife passes away, she can't have a will that transfers her interest in that property to her husband or to someone else other than her husband. It automatically goes to the husband. That's what right of survivorship means. Right of survivorship means that it conveys to that person. Okay? Now, the last of these is your community property. Your community property is going to end up being what we use here in Texas. And this is in this particular situation. So in this particular situation, you are going to have community property. And community property is, of course, going to be real or personal property that's acquired during marriage. Okay? So in this situation, what ends up happening is if we go over and the person is married, any real or personal property is going to end up, it will convey to the other party, right? And there's something I'm going to tell you about that in just a second. Give me just a moment here, please. So what happens in this particular situation is that with community property ends up, it is going to be where husband and wife are married. Now, they don't always have to be legally married. Now, that's where this kind of gets a little confusing. With community property, what occurs in this particular situation is that, say, for example, that we end up having in certain situations that we are having, say, Mr. Grossman, he meets a particular lady that he decides to move in, okay? He decides to let her move in, and she ends up in that particular situation. They are treating themselves as basically, they hold themselves out as husband and wife, okay? If you hold yourself out as husband and wife and you are not married, Okay, you've not gone to the courts and all that and got married. You can have common law marriage. And if there's common law marriage, guess what, Mr. Grossman? This lady that you've moved in with you, if she feels and y'all hold out that you're common law married, community property comes into play. And if you happen to come into some money, guess what happens? She gets half of everything you got. Okay? That in the situation is very key that you understand that community property in this situation must end up, it will include anything that's out there. So community property, it's the real or personal property that is acquired during marriage. It's going to have conveyance that's going to require both spouses' signature. When one spouse dies, the survivor owns one half of the community property. The other half, however, can be distributed by will, if no will, according to the state law. Okay? So in some situations, what can occur in this situation is that unlike the one that we just talked about in regards to the entirety, where basically interest automatically goes to the other spouse, in community property, the husband or the wife can transfer their ownership to someone else. Okay? Now, in a trust, however, this is where a neutral individual will hold title for the benefit of another. So Mr. Grossman owns a property, and Mr. Grossman asked Mr. Wyatt to manage his property in trust. In that situation, Mr. Wyatt has no ownership interest in the property. He's just managing the property for Mr. Grossman. When Mr. Grossman dies, Mr. Grossman has told Mr. Wyatt that he wants to transfer that ownership to Miss Linda. Okay? So when Mr. Grossman dies, Mr. Wyatt, your duty is to now initiate the process to transfer ownership to Miss Linda. Does that make sense? Okay? So in that particular situation, what is occurring here is that you're going to end up having a neutral individual, a third party, is just holding that title until the action of a death or some other action stated in trust ends up for the transferring of that ownership to the other party. Okay? Now, in regards to partnership, now we're talking about businesses, okay? How they own them. Now, of course, a partnership, have you taken any business law? Wyatt, have you taken business law? No. Not yet? Okay. In a partnership, what happens is, this is kind of business law right here, it's where two or more people start a business with the intent of making profit, okay? So two or more people come together, they want to start a business. Now, there's two types of partners, and you'll see right here, you have a general partner and a limited partner. A general partner is going to basically, it's going to be all the partners participate in the operation and management of the business and share full liability of the business losses and obligations, okay? So in this particular situation, we're going to say that Miss Linda and Mr. Eugene and Mr. Justin all come together, and we all come together and we agree to start a business, have an operation, and we're trying to participate to make money. We want to be a profitable business, okay? In that situation, if Mr. Justin, Mr. Linda, or Miss Linda and Mr. Eugene are all actively, keyword, actively engaged in the business, then they are general partners, each and every one of them, meaning that they all are entitled to 1/3 ownership of profits of the business, okay? If they are a limited partner, say Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda say, you know what, I just want to put my name on the business, funnel some money into it, make a little cash on the side. Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda would be a limited partner. So what happens is there always has to be one general partner, because somebody has to actually be doing the business. And Miss Linda and Mr. Eugene could be limited partners. If a limited partner, it's only one or more general partners plus a number of limited partners, and the business is run by the general partner. So in this situation is, Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda say, Justin, we want you to run the business, and we're going to give you, in exchange for ownership in the company, we're going to give you $50,000, $25,000 from each, okay? In exchange for that $25,000, we want 10% ownership into the business. Okay? So anything that's there, we get 10% of the money. So in that situation, we give you money in exchange for ownership. So in that situation, Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda do that. In that particular situation, it's no longer a general partnership. It is a limited partnership with 2 limited partners and 1 general partner. Okay? But again, it's still a partnership. Okay? Another one is called a corporation. Okay? Now, a corporation, of course, is going to be its own person. So in this situation, a corporation is a legal entity that is created under the authority of the laws of the state from which it receives its charter. It's managed and operated by its board of directors. So in this particular situation, Wyatt decides that he wants to go over and create a corporation. So Wyatt, what I always tell people is, Wyatt, you're standing here, you yourself you're a person. But imagine right next to you is Wyatt's Realty Group, okay? In a corporation, it is its own individual person, if that makes sense. I am ending up, I'm still Wyatt, but here next to me is the corporation. Because there's 2 people, guess what happens? They both get taxed. So in this situation is, you got, come up here for a second, Wyatt, so I can kind of give them a view for the people here. So Wyatt, you stand right here, and you yourself, and I am Wyatt's Realty Group. So here's Wyatt, the real person. I'm Wyatt Realty Group, okay? Miss Linda, you come to me as Wyatt Realty Group, and you make checks payable to me, okay? So at that chance, I got to pay taxes on that money that you're giving to me as Wyatt Realty Group. But when I go pay my owner, Mr. Wyatt here, I have to give him money. And what happens when he gets the money? It's taxed again. This is what's called double taxation. You can sit down. So in that situation is, the money gets taxed when it's given to me. When I, as a business, give the money to my owner, Mr. Wyatt, it's now taxed again. So that's why in the situation is, it's not good because you're getting double tax, the government's getting a lot of money. However, if there's a lot of liability, this is the best way to have it, because they can never go after Wyatt personally. They can only come after Wyatt Realty personally. Do you see the difference here? Okay. So in that situation is, it protects you from lawsuits. They can only come after this business right here, me. Okay. Now another one is going to be your limited liability. And this one's what's called the cream of the crop. Okay, because it takes the benefits of this, the partnership, and it ends up, takes the protections of a corporation and creates this limited liability corporation. So what happens is you get to enjoy the limited liability that's offered by a corporation, but you also get the tax advantages of a partnership. So in an LLC, I don't have to pay taxes for my LLC and for myself. My taxes comes to me as an individual, and I pay taxes at my personal tax rate versus paying them at the corporate tax rate. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, condominiums. Condominiums, cooperatives, townhouses, and timeshares. These are very key. You are going to have to know these differences. And guys and gals, we're so close. We're almost done this evening. So, condominiums. These are going to have owners that have fee title to the, what's this word, Miss Linda? Interior space of the unit and share title to the common area. So, in this situation, in this room that I'm in right now, I can own this room if I'm in a condominium. But I do not own the building. I do not own the commons area. I own an interest in the commons area, but I only own what I'm in physically. Okay. Single units are going to be transferred by deed, will, or living trust. So a single unit is going to be what type of property, Wyatt? Real or personal? This is where you should know that stuff. Transferred by
Oh, that would be the.
what?
So the deed makes it personal, right?
So when you go to the grocery store,
That's
you get a deed.
not your receipt.
So it's what?
That'd be
What type?
real.
There you go. You're getting it. You're getting it. Hey, don't feel bad. That's how this works, okay? Take time. Always ask yourself, do I go to the grocery store? Do I get a deed for my groceries? No, I don't. So then if it's no, it's got to be real. If I get a receipt, personal. Make sense? Always ask yourself that. So again, in this situation, single units been transferred by deed, therefore they are real property in that situation. A cooperative. A cooperative is basically tenants are going to own shares in a corporation. Okay? So they don't actually own the building, they own shares in the business. Okay? So the tenant owns shares in a corporation, partnership, or trust that holds title to the building, and the tenants have proprietary leases and the right to occupy their units. So really, they're in a place that they're leasing, but they have interest in the corporation that owns the building. Okay, that's a cooperative. And its shares are going to be personal property and may be sold or transferred, or transfer of shares may be restricted by certain bylaws. So what happens is if I buy into a cooperative, I own into the business, so I own a portion of the business, but I don't actually own real estate, I just own ownership of the corporation, which is a ownership document, which is personal property. So I actually don't own my building, okay? Timeshares. I remember when I was a little boy, my mom and dad used to take me to those little timeshare little things where you'd go in and sit down and they would tell you, if you come to this deal, you can win a free boat or a free TV or free whatever, okay? The thing about it is timeshares are going to be a timeshare state. It's going to be a fee simple interest, and you need to know these things, fee simple. A timeshare use agreement is a personal property that expires after a specific time. An interest in a timeshare estate may be conveyed by deed or will by the owner, and an interest in in timeshares use is personal property that may or may not be transferable according to the contract. So a timeshare is basically you have a limited time that you can use this deal. They may say, Mr. Grossman, you can go over, you can stay in this place for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, Mr. Grossman, you only get 2 weeks every year. So if Mr. Grossman doesn't stay in it during his 2 weeks, he loses it. He doesn't get to add them up. He doesn't get to rack them up, okay? He only can end up in this situation. He can only use it for a particular matter, okay? Does that make sense, okay? Now, in that situation, that primarily is going to end up covering the material that we're going to have for this evening, okay? So that kind of covers it. Now, I know this is a lot of material. I know it's a lot of stuff that but everybody keep on track. So far, I've been looking at everything, and I think everybody has access to the matters, to their quizzes. Everybody has access to the discussion. Everybody has access to those. Make certain that you're completing those so that we can move along. We will be completing this course relatively quick. We're already done through chapter 2. There are 10 chapters in this, so we only have 8 more lectures to go. Once we're finished, you've done your class, okay? And then we'll go from there. My question before we go on, I'm going to ask real quick, does Ms. Linda, do you have any questions over the content tonight? Mr. Eugene? Mr. Grossman, any questions? Mr. Wyatt? Mr. Keith?
No, sir.
All right, Mr. Garrett?
No, sir.
All right. And Mr. Darren and Mr. Jacob, I see y'all are kind of here. I don't know if y'all have access to talk to me, but if y'all have questions, of course, feel free to email me. I don't mind answering questions. I will, like I said, I'll have the material up for y'all here shortly. We're going to go ahead, like I said, and call this a lecture. And what we'll end up doing is I will upload the material. I'll put it into the campus, the Google Classroom, whatever we have here, and we will end up, it should be viewable for y'all probably within about an hour to an hour and a half. So if there are any questions, y'all have my email. Feel free to contact me. And other than that, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and call this an evening. And it was good seeing you, and I will see you all tomorrow at 5:30. Have a good night. Talk to you.